Welcome to the Man Amongst Men podcast. Live a life of intentionality, adventure, and brotherhood. Take the inner journey and live out over your edge constantly. Here are your hosts, Dominic and Brian.
This episode on meditation is for you if you've ever said one of the following things. I've tried meditation, but I can't clear my mind of its thoughts. I've tried meditation, but I can't sit still that long. I don't have time for meditation. My schedule is so unpredictable that I can't have a regular meditation practice. Running is my meditation. Cooking is my meditation. Gardening is my meditation, or any iteration of thereof. If you've ever said one of those things, then this episode on meditation is for you. This is really an entry point for someone who is curious about starting a meditation practice, or for someone who's attempted to but been frustrated by your failed attempts in the past to establish a regular practice, or not knowing what it's done for you. This conversation is for you. And for those of you who are seasoned meditation instructors, you are still in for a lot of wisdom, because we proudly present to you one of the people that I believe to be one of the most important voices and ambassadors for meditation in this country. And he would be horrified to hear me say that because he's a very humble man, Cory Muscara. Cory is a dear friend of mine, and he has done the work in this space. When I met him 5 years ago, he told me his story that at the age of 22 or 23, he left Long Island, flew to the other side of the world in Burma, and for 6 months, he lived as a monk in complete silence while practicing meditation for up to 20 hours a day. And so this guy has done the work. He shaved his head, wore the cloth, lived like a monk, slept on a mattress that was so thin that you could squeeze it together and feel the bones in your fingertips. This guy has done the work. And the reason why he is so important to meditation in this country, and he speaks all around the world as well, but I hone it into this country because he has taken this centuries old, thousands of years old practice, and he's bringing it to the modern professional who thinks that they don't have time, who thinks that they're doing it wrong, who thinks they can't establish a practice, and he's making it real and approachable for them. Cory came in and did meditation for my sales team at Prudential 4 years ago, type A personalities who had never meditated before, and I didn't know if they would take to it. They loved him. Cory is the most downloaded meditation instructor on the wildly popular app Simple Habit, so go check that out. He's been on Dr. Oz a number of times for entry points into how you can start your meditation practice. He's traveled and spoken with Dan Harris, the author of 10% Happier. And Cory has a book of his own that's coming out in fall of 2019, and I'll update the show notes when we have the final title there. And a final point on Cory is that last weekend, I entrusted my 72-year-old mother and 75-year-old father, who have never meditated before in their life, to one of Cory's retreats where we spent 3 days in meditation together, where my parents had never done any of that work before. And they left. They went in very skeptical. They were doing it for me, and they left different people. Eyes open, hearts open. And my father every day since then has actually done a minimum of 10 minutes of meditation every day. He texts me every day that he does it. And my mother has meditated about 3 times over this past week. If you know anything about my mom, getting her to sit down and sit still for any period of time is a fucking miracle. So this man takes many of the barriers that we have to meditation about it doesn't work for me, my mind is too busy, I don't have time for it, I can't establish a regular practice, and he helps you to create entry points for it. And the people that I had a chance to meet last weekend at his retreat who have done work with him for years, some of them would go so far as to say they trust no person in their lives with their emotions and their futures than they do with Cory. So I implore you to listen to his deep-rooted wisdom in this episode. Enjoy.
Cory, we're doing this podcast from 3 different places. You're in New York, Long Island. Brian is in Brooklyn. And I am in a place that actually has a little bit of a special meaning for you.
That's right. I didn't even think of that.
I am in Boulder, Colorado at the St. Julian Hotel.
Is that where I did my first corporate speaking engagement?
That's right, man.
I still remember the couch in the waiting room where I was sitting waiting for you to come out and bring me in.
Yeah, we were icing you. Just wanted to see what you were made of out there.
Yeah. How long can I sit still?
Yeah. So Cory and my relationship goes back 4 or 5 years now, man.
Yeah.
And we became instant friends. We met at a hypnosis course. And when I learned about Cory's story about 6 months in silent meditation in Burma and shaving the head, wearing the cloth, sleeping on a mat that you could press your fingers together and feel the bones in it, I was like, this guy's the real deal. And meditation had made such a big difference in my life. I said, if I could bring him in front of my type A salespeople at Prudential Financial, and I was running a retreat out here for our sales team, wouldn't that be cool? And I was scared shitless because I didn't know if meditation was going to be something they were going to reject as too woo-woo. And when I brought Cory out here, and this was, you said, your first corporate gig, you blew the team away, man. They couldn't get enough of you. And many of them still have a meditation practice today as a result of that 90-minute session that you did 4 years ago.
Oh, that was special. It's cool that you're there right now. That really started the beginning of the corporate work I now do. So a lot of appreciation for you taking that risk.
That feels really good to me, man. Well, why don't we dive right into it, Cory? What's the difference between meditation and mindfulness?
Right. It's a common question, and it has a lot of different answers depending on who you speak to. My response is that mindfulness is a particular quality of mind that we're cultivating, a particular quality of awareness that we bring into our lives and into our moments. And meditation is a practice that we utilize to enhance that quality of awareness. It's not that we necessarily develop that quality of awareness, because that awareness is inherent to being human, but it's a structured period of time that we practice dropping back into that. So you could think of mindfulness as like your fitness level and meditation as going to the gym. When we're talking about words and semantics, like everyone interprets things differently. But what I'm giving you here is within the mindfulness world, how these two are typically defined.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So mindfulness is your fitness level and meditation is like going to the gym. So it's your practice on a regular basis.
Yeah, right. And in the same way that you could develop your fitness level outside of going to the gym, like you walk up the stairs to your apartment and strengthen your legs and your core, and however else you would do that in your day-to-day life. It's not like you can only develop mindfulness in your meditation practice. It can be developed while you're having a conversation with someone, and the particular intention you bring to be mindful, to be aware. And we'll go into like more of what that means. Having like a structured period of time, whether it's 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, where it's like, okay, I'm taking this time to specifically focus on cultivating this quality of awareness, is as important as taking structured time to specifically develop your fitness level. So while you can develop mindfulness in day-to-day life, I think it's absolutely essential to have some form of meditation practice where that's done very intentionally. And then it bleeds over into your day-to-day life more organically.
Yeah. So why does it matter to cultivate this level of awareness? You know, Brian and I were talking yesterday, some of the resistance points we get from people about meditation is, I don't know what it does for me. I tried, I sat down and the voice in my head was so loud, I couldn't sit still, and it actually just agitated me more. So what is this thing about cultivating awareness that matters?
Yeah, I notice like in me right now, I'm not knowing where to start with a response to that, because it's so subjective, meaning like what I might get out of it is going to be different than what you get out of it and something else. And for one person, the benefits they get might not necessarily be the benefits another person is looking for. Let's just take that first example where someone like sat down, they tried it out, they downloaded Headspace or whatever, they did 10 minutes, and they noticed that their mind was still racing. Well, for a lot of people, there's this belief that meditation is about completely clearing their mind of thoughts. You can imagine a type A personality coming into meditation and saying like, I'm going to be the best meditator there is. I'm going to be so much more peaceful than everyone else at work. This is going to be awesome. Focus on my breath. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. And then they start thinking about Patrick Swayze and ghosts and like, why did he die?
Every time.
Yeah, right? Everyone's thinking about Patrick Swayze. And then we go into like, oh my God, why am I thinking about Patrick Swayze? Like, I'm such an idiot. I'm so bad at this. I knew I'd be bad at this. I have ADD, I have ADHD, I have OCD. We've reinforced this negative, like ruminative anxiety-ridden pattern of thinking that was really the reason we were coming to the meditation in the first place. And so a lot of people end up using their meditation practice to reinforce the very conditioning of mind that they need to soften and shift. So what we can like reduce that to is, on some level, this mindfulness meditation thing is very much about giving yourself permission to be human, to take a seat for 5 minutes. You're making the commitment to yourself that like, hey, I'm going to have thoughts. I'm a human. I'm going to have emotions. I'm a human. There's going to be some discomfort in my knees, or there's going to be an itch on my face. None of this is wrong. And can I actually just practice being with all of these dimensions of my humanness? That's not only a powerful training in itself, like training the mind to be with discomfort and different aspects of your life. It's a radical act of love and kindness. And for a lot of people listening, maybe like that might not be what they're interested in right now, self-love or self-care. But as human beings, we all have wired into us the need for some sort of self-compassion, for some sort of self-love, for some sort of not having to beat ourselves up. A lot of people I work with, especially in the corporate context, and especially high-performing folks, their inner critic and their inner narrative is very strong. And in the example that you just shared, they often will come to this meditation practice, get more intimately in touch with that inner critic, and it freaks them out. It's like, I don't want to focus on this, and it's not going anywhere. Like I sat for 10 minutes like everyone told me to, and I'm still thinking all of these thoughts. For those people, I would say just practice befriending that inner critic. Every time you notice that a thought arise of like, you're an idiot, or why did you say that thing to that person before? Why can't you do this right? I would start to smile to that voice in the same way that, you know, if you were with a child and they were yelling at themselves, or like a 5-year-old that took a test, if 5-year-olds take tests and they're like, oh my God, I'm so dumb. Why can't I get this right? You wouldn't go up to that child and be like, yeah, you are dumb. Why didn't you get this right? Right? You'd say, no, it's okay. Like, you're 5 years old. It's not going to ruin your life. Like, you're doing great. And look at all the other things that you're doing so well. And what can we learn from this? But we don't take that perspective with our own minds. We take the perspective of like, yeah, what is wrong with you? Why don't you get this right? And we just reinforce this constantly. On the most basic level, it's just like giving ourselves some space to be human, not necessarily letting the mind run in all of these different directions, because there is some intentionality to it. Like if we're focusing on the breath, we'll notice the mind wander off into that inner critic, and then we'll gently guide the attention back. And then 2 seconds later, it'll go off into another thought, and then we'll gently guide it back.
Is that considered success? I guess when we're talking about, you know, high performance guys meditating and they're doing it for a reason, I'll liken it to the scenario you gave about working out. If I go to the track and I just decide to walk around the track, I'm not going to get in shape. I'm not going to meet these goals. And so when it comes to meditation, like, what is considered success? I mean, you mentioned the intentionality part, and there has to be a piece of the doing of it. So I'm just curious, like, if somebody tells me it doesn't work for me, is that true? Is that just another way of saying, actually, you're on the right path?
This is another one I struggle with, and I don't have a good answer. There are some teachers that like have clear ideas of what success looks like in meditation, and I'm always highly skeptical of that, because in order for something to be successful, there needs to be some goal, and where you're at needs to be evaluated against that goal. And for so many people, the goals vary. Like within a Buddhist context, the goal is full enlightenment. And so your success is going to be defined very different than someone that's trying to just reduce stress. What I would say is that within like a 5-minute meditation, if you're showing up, and let's just say that the structure of it is focusing on the breath and making that your center of focus, the mind wanders and then coming back to the breath. Success isn't necessarily the length of time you're focusing on the breath, but it's about the quality of awareness throughout the duration of those 5 minutes. Your meditation is defined just as much by the awareness that you had when the mind wandered and your capacity to bring it back, than it's defined by the sustained amount of moments on the breath itself. So quality of awareness throughout the meditation is probably the biggest way that I would define what success looks like. even within that, there are a lot of nuances, because you can be aware of the mind wandering, and then you can go into a thought pattern of like, oh, why is my mind, why can't I get this right? And so now you're infusing a layer of judgment in that. And that's going to happen. And then can you be aware of that judgment and go, oh, there I go again. And can I just bring the attention back to this breath? I've been alluding to it, but I haven't said it explicitly. There's a gentle quality, a non-judgmental, curious quality to this awareness that we're cultivating that is very different than our usual beat ourselves up, get this right, grit our teeth through to the next moment in order to achieve something.
Hey, Cory, that's one of the things that you taught me 4 or 5 years ago, which was this awareness of the judgment that's being brought to my quote unquote performance of meditation. I looked at everything in my life as a performance. How am I performing? Am I meditating optimally? Am I using this time the most effectively? Am I de-stressing myself to the highest of levels? When the answer was no, that was the narrative that I didn't even realize was running in my mind. There would be this cascade of judgment until you called my awareness to it. And this gentle thing that you're talking about, once I recognize that I am judging myself, my natural instinct is to be pissed off at that and to resent myself for that. And then it would create this new cascade of frustration. So once I really started to embrace this concept of gentle awareness, getting curious around, I'm beating the shit out of myself today. I can't seem to get Patrick Swayze out of my mind now. And to get curious about that, that's what allows some of this stuff to now come up and then pass.
Yeah, 100%.
One of the things that you were saying before, Cory, this is really interesting about self-love, and how you also said that some people may not be in it for self-love. I would say one real practical application of self-love is stress reduction. Mm-hmm. And it seems that like many of the people that I know, myself included, come to meditation first and foremost for this idea of my life is crazy. I'm constantly overwhelmed. Every single minute of my day is structured and scheduled. So I need it for stress reduction. And Brian and I also came up with a couple of different categories. We just wanted to send them your way and see if these are the categories that you see people embracing meditation for. The first one we said is stress reduction. Another one is around performance. For example, Michael Jordan used to meditate before doing visualizations before every game and seeing the hoop be twice as big as it normally would and where he'd be on the floor so that he could pass the ball to his teammates or receive the ball from his teammates. Meditation could be used for a state of creation, envisioning the new future. We did this at our men's retreat this past weekend that Brian and I ran. We had men envision what the next decade of their lives was going to look like, or the end of their lives was going to look like, and to create an amazing future that they were excited to live into. And then also another category that we wanted to hit with you, which is around cultivating sexual awareness and sexual energy and harnessing that. These are just a few of the categories that we know that we've used. Maybe you can correct me, mindfulness practices or meditation practices that have been really beneficial to both of our lives.
Yeah, under the umbrella of meditation, there are a lot of subcategories, and visualizations can fall into that, and affirmations and different kind of manifestation type practices, and even different tantric practices, which will involve your sexuality. There are some distinctions between those and mindfulness meditation, but I think within all of it, you're cultivating an intimacy with yourself and your mind and your humanness, and learning how to be in a better relationship to it and to potentially harness it so that it serves you in more of a positive way rather than being enslaved to it and all the directions that it wants to take you on autopilot.
Yeah, right on. And one of the stories that I shared this weekend at the men's retreat, and so we had 5 really high performing men that were there, right? Heads of businesses, and never had done meditation before, never had done a retreat or personal development before. And they really seemed to resonate with my part of the story around how I came to meditation. I've been practicing for 6 or 7 years now. It's a superpower that I believe in my life that allows me to do a lot of the things I just shared, right? Reduce stress, to envision the future, to become more aware on a moment-to-moment basis of how I'm thinking and how I'm feeling and how my thoughts are affecting my reality. I, a year and a half ago, had my brain mapped at this neuro research facility called 40 Years of Zen. It's Dave Asprey, the founder of Bulletproof's neuro research facility, and they take a look at your brain, hook you up with all these sensors. And what they found in my brain was that in the prefrontal cortex, which is, the more evolved, newer part of our brains that's responsible for critical thinking and discipline and contemplating the future, was that I am 3 standard deviations away from the mean in terms of beta brainwave activity in that part of my brain. So what does that mean? There's 5 different types of brainwave frequencies, and I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but if you've ever heard of alpha brainwaves, that's kind of the flow state, right? Like alpha brainwaves require a certain amount of electricity in your brain. So there's like an energy that your body needs to and your brain needs to produce. But that alpha state is like when you're most creative. That's when you're in flow. It's like where time just ceases to exist. But there's a higher version. When I say higher version, it requires more electricity in your brain. That's beta brainwave frequency. And that's like when you're doing critical thinking. That's when you're grinding on something. That's when you're thinking about the future, or you need discipline and willpower to do something. So my prefrontal cortex basically is hyperactive in beta brainwave frequency. 3 standard deviations out means that like 99.5% of the population has fewer beta brainwaves than I do. And they said that that's good news and bad news. The good news is I'm probably pretty good at discipline and willpower and complex problem solving and really understanding how my decisions now affect my future. And these are all things that have shown up quite a bit in my life. But it's also exhausting because it requires a lot of electricity in your brain. And they're like, you have the keys to a Lamborghini, which is awesome, but you're driving that Lamborghini on city streets and in driveways. And you need to learn how to become more efficient around that. And what they were able to find is that there are parts of my brain that have quite a bit of alpha brainwave frequency because of my meditation practice, which allows me to quiet the active thinking mind and allow something much more gentle, much more ease, like a more receptive nature. And they could see the actual evidence of that in my brain when I entered a meditative state because I'd been practicing that. And for me, I share that story with so many others who are like feeling like they have the same kind of brain that I do and that could never settle down. But for me, it's been life-changing.
So when you said your activity was 3 standard deviations from the mean, that in a negative direction.
It's actually not a negative or positive direction. It just means that, let's say, if you were to plot everyone's beta brainwave frequency on a scale, it's top 0.5% of beta brainwaves, which
I see.
can be very useful. You want to give me a puzzle? I can solve that shit, right?
Yeah.
If you want to start a habit, I can anticipate the future consequences of my behaviors in today. Then I have an aptitude for that based on the way that my brain functions. But it's also this thing of like, I can ruminate. A thought can get stuck in my mind and obsession and compulsion, those types of things. If I don't have awareness of that, and meditation creates that awareness of when I'm in that rumination state, and then also I can break the pattern of that, interrupt it, and then quiet my mind so that more of the alpha brainwave frequencies, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but when they study someone's brain like yours, or a monk that's been practicing and living in a monastic lifestyle for 30 or 40 years, their whole brain is just covered with alpha brainwaves.
Yeah, that's been my limited understanding of it. And I haven't gone as deep into the neuroscience. I mean, I've gone deep enough into the science to understand what they're doing, the brain scans that they're doing, and the different science supporting the practice. I always have like a bit of a complicated relationship to the science because the people that I go to when I really want to learn meditation are, they know nothing about like the science, like the monks that have spent tens of thousands of hours practicing and refining these skills of understanding and being human, but specifically like understanding the mind. I think we just care less about the science. And so like there's 2 different forms of science. There's like what we can study in the laboratory and brain scans and through double-blind studies, which are good and important. And then there's like the science of self-exploration and self-study, which you become the researcher, you become the subject, and you become the data points. That's going to be much more subjective, of course, which is why it wouldn't fly in Western scientific culture. But when you have thousands of people that have done this over millennia, certain themes arise and certain understandings of the mind arise. And so I tend to like sort of value that kind of scientific inquiry a bit more, but I'm still hugely fascinated with what we're finding.
When I hear Dominic talking about this, it's almost like science is pointing at the thing underneath, the biological thing that's causing us to feel or behave differently. And I know just a couple of years ago, I started my meditation practice, and I feel as though that the past 2 years, I've had more go on in my life, but it has felt slower in the best of ways. I feel like I've captured more of the moments, and I remember more privately or more detail. And for me, it feels like a superpower. Yeah. And I'm curious for you. You started this meditation practice years ago, and I imagine that the Cory pre-meditation is very different than the Cory today. And I'm curious just what you've noticed in your daily operations that feels different after having this practice for a while.
The biggest thing that stands out to me is, as corny as it might sound, I've become my own best friend. I feel very cozy within myself. And I used to have a lot of self-judgment and anxiety, worry, holding myself to a high standard. And now, like, I still hold myself to a high standard. I still have a lot of goals that I try to reach, but I really don't beat myself up, or I don't have the same kind of judgment that I used to have toward myself. I can't take that voice seriously if it does arise, and I smile at it. I have a lot of compassion for this Cory guy. He's trying the best he can. He's working hard. He makes mistakes. He's human. Just in like spending so much time with myself, being with my mind, and seeing just how complicated it is, that in one moment I want one thing, another moment I want another thing, and they contradict. And I want to be close to someone, but I also want to be away from them. Like, I want to be connected, but I also want my own time. Like, messy being a human. And so, like, the biggest thing has just been like a bit of ease in that process. And like, when it gets complicated and when things get hard and when I make mistakes, you maybe didn't do your best on that one, and you did make a mistake there. So what can we learn from this, and what can we do better? I really enjoy time with myself, and it's created a baseline of happiness that does not require everything to be perfectly manufactured in my life to feel fulfilled. I think that's relevant for a lot of high-performing people. Whether it's conscious or subconscious, there's often this sense of like, once I get this or once I achieve that, then things will come together, or then I'll be happy, or then I can relax. And seldom is that the case. In fact, I haven't ever seen it be the case where the puzzle pieces arrange in a particular way and then it's just smooth sailing. And I encourage anyone to listen to this, like, reflect on things in your life that you had the perspective of, once I get there, like once I get married, once I graduate, once I get this job, once I get this promotion, then things will really shift. And see, like, did that actually happen? There may be some big things, like I needed to get out of debt and I needed to get a job so I could make money and have my basic needs met. And like, that had a big impact on my life. No doubt. That's inarguable. But did it stop this like craving for something more, or like looking to the next moment to bring some potential thing? I haven't found an example of that. And then like, evaluate in this moment in your life, what is it that you're looking toward that you hold with the same conviction, such as like, well, once I retire, like, then things will really shift. Or once I could get out of the Northeast and go somewhere where it's warmer and the kids move out, like, then it will come together. This is different than the thing that happened 10 years ago or 20 years ago for X, Y, and Z reasons. And then like, is it? Because it's not the getting the things, it's the pattern of mind that we're working with. We're designed to constantly be craving something else. And then like, once I get that, then it will come together. And I really implore people to look at that closely, because you can have these goals and visions, and I have that in a huge way in my life. But if your well-being is contingent upon meeting those things, then that's just climbing a ladder with an infinite number of rungs.
Yes.
Cory, it sounds like a very peaceful state to be in. And of course, you would answer this question in a way of self-care, self-love, inner peace. What I want to reflect back is the time where I first met you. And Dominic and I have talked about this a couple times, where we asked ourselves the questions, who are the type of guys that we've met in our lives that immediately we could connect with, that we didn't feel like there was an element of competition right away, and we trusted that they actually had our back, that they were there in the moment with us. And your name came top of the list for both of us.
Oh, wow.
And so what you're talking about, yes, it's the self-love, and yes, it's the almost a soft confidence that comes with that self-love. And at least how that shows up through you in this world is a really beautiful place to make connections and relationships. And it doesn't feel like there needs to be something extracted or taken from the other person, me being the other person in that case. And so I've seen very much the power of what you do in the few in-person interactions that we've had.
Thanks,
Right.
brother. I appreciate that. And just to build on that, we're all trying to manufacture our lives in such a way that's going to make us fulfilled, even if it's under the guise of wanting to be productive or make a positive impact. It's all in like the quest to have some sort of meaning and some sort of higher well-being. And the more we can feel that fulfillment internally, the less we need to step on others, manipulate others, get ahead of others at the sake of their well-being in order to have that fulfillment ourselves. And I think when we're operating from a place of anxiety and fear and feeling deeply that like I need that promotion in order to be happier, or I need this to happen in my life in order to feel happier, then we're going to step on people and use people in a particular way to get to those places. And the more that that's just here in this moment, the less we cling to having to do that in order to be fulfilled, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And Brian couldn't have said it any better. I want to echo those sentiments. And before we pivot into a couple questions that Brian has about the typical obstacles that people present to us about starting a meditation practice, I think it'd be really helpful for people to hear more of your backstory, Cory, because you started from a place of insomnia, of heartbreak and rumination, and how that led you to your journey of what you're doing today, and how that led you overseas to shaving the head, to spending 6 months in silence. Maybe you can walk us through that part of the story.
Yeah. So poor sleep was a part of it, but even before that, the access point was trying to impress a girl, as both of you know.
It always is, isn't it?
I guess.
Some of the biggest changes in our lives.
It's so corny. I also love it because to me, it's just like the most human thing. I wasn't coming to it for any noble reasons. I had a hippie girlfriend at the time. I thought she was cooler than me. I wanted her to think I was cool, and she was in a meditation. And so I started meditating and let her know that I was doing it. And as you guys know, there was no happy ending, at least at that time. She broke up with me a couple of weeks later.
This is college?
This was college.
Yep.
I think I was like 19 or 20 at the time. I continued to meditate, and that was primarily because of just now feeling the heartbreak and the rumination of like, that was really painful, I remember. And I had all these regrets, or what if I did things differently, or I'm not going to find someone again. And it just sucked. I was doing the meditation because people said it could provide some relief. I remember one of the first times I did it, maybe like the third session, I was lying on my dorm room bed and I was doing the whole focus on your breath thing, but I was practicing noticing my thoughts and then coming back to my breath. And I had this moment of insight that, oh my God, I can watch these thoughts move through my mind and I don't have to take them so seriously. Like I don't have to be caught up in them. It was truly like watching clouds pass through the sky, or the stock market ticker tape, just like, oh, just another thought of like, oh, I'm going to be so lonely, or what's wrong with me? And that creating some distance while still being intimately involved with the thoughts was hugely liberating and just provided so much relief. And I remember thinking, like, how come no one ever taught me this before? How did I not know about this? I thought I invented something or discovered something. So that started to excite me. It got the ball rolling, created some momentum. Then my sleep improved radically. I was waking up like 20 to 30 times a night, and it had been like that for a decade prior, ever since adolescence. Within a couple weeks of the meditation, started only waking up 2 to 3 times a night, had a night where I didn't wake up at all, and that really piqued my interest. I was able to focus more in class. I felt more grounded and at peace, and I just remember walking around, and even though nothing in my external world had changed radically, and if anything, like I should have been more sad with the breakup, there was this sense of feeling a bit more fulfilled and at ease and peaceful and happier without the external world shifting so much. And so a whole series of events cascaded from there, and I met with this multi-billionaire hedge fund manager in the New York Stock Exchange. He gave a 2-hour PowerPoint presentation, sucked my soul out of my body, and just like remember feeling very vividly. It's like, I don't know exactly what I want, but I know I don't want to end up like this guy. And it wasn't a dig against finance or the business world. It was just like, however this guy was, like, I didn't want that. And it got me asking, what do I want? And everything kept coming down to wanting to be happier and more fulfilled. And the biggest thing, and this recognition I don't talk about too much, but I just remember thinking that if I had $100 million and I was 80 percentage points happy, that would be good. But if I only had $50,000, but I was 81 percentage points happy, which one would I choose? I remember thinking, oh, it would be the 81 percentage points happy, because I would be happier. And at the heart of all of this is just wanting to be happier. It was just crystal clear in my mind that it made me think, oh, before I start chasing all of this stuff, let me actually understand what will bring me happiness, and then craft my life more or less around this. Granted, like, I have to acknowledge this is all like a very privileged position to be asking what is happiness. And I did have a ton of college loans, but to have a father that more or less supported this and a mother that supported this, there was a lot of privilege there. So I do acknowledge that. It was my real inquiry. And I came home, talked to my dad. He was getting into this stuff as well. And from there, went on my first meditation retreat, cried my eyes out, just had a really deeply heartfelt experience. Felt like I was getting in touch with how much of my life I was missing. 6 months later, went on another retreat. And then when I graduated college, just really wanted to go deeper. Type A personality. So like, how deep can I take this? Everyone's talking about transcending the ego. I want to know what that is. Went over to Burma and lived in silence for about 6 months and meditated 14 hours a day, the type A version of meditation retreats.
No other way. There's no other way to do it, man.
That's right. At least for me.
I've heard the story. I'm still fascinated by it. But for someone who's never even contemplated what it would be like to spend an hour or two in silence, and you went and spent 6 months, you shaved your head. There's great pictures that I'm sure we could put it as part of the email that we send out about this, with your shaved head and wearing the cloth. But what were the first 2 weeks like, man, of showing up and being deeply committed to this practice, where you had to sit in awkward postures or postures that were uncomfortable for you, and silence for 14 hours a day?
It was very, very difficult. And I thought I was going to leave after a week. To, I guess, paint the picture a bit more, for some, like, going into silence for 6 months might sound like a vacation. And in some ways it kind of is, but not really, because it's not just silence. It's like you no longer have all of the distractions that you use to not have to meet yourself in the mirror. So there's no technology. You can't check Facebook when you're bored. You're practicing being with yourself every moment of every day. And damn, is it brutal at times, because the mind is chaotic, the body creates pain, and we were waking up at 3 a.m., going to bed at 9:30 p.m., only getting about 5 hours of sleep a night. So I'm sleep deprived, sleeping on mattresses, as you said, that were like about an inch thick, and you could feel the wood plank beneath it. Meditating 14 hours a day, which everyone's sitting cross-legged. And here in the West, if you go on a meditation retreat, they have chairs and they have nice cushions. You could prop yourself up. Over there, it's like one flat bamboo mat. Maybe if you're lucky, there's some cushions in the back, but they're very thin, because everyone grows up in most Asian countries, like sitting when they eat, squatting to go to the bathroom. So they keep their flexibility. But me, like, I was like the only kid in kindergarten that couldn't sit cross-legged comfortably on the floor. I'm just very tight. I took a pillow and I wrapped it in string, like one of my sleeping pillows. I tried to make that my meditation cushion. And it was just brutal. It's 100 degrees. You're sweating. There's no air conditioning. There's mosquitoes. And my body was just in excruciating pain that first week, to the point where, like, from the top of my shoulders all the way down to the base of my spine, like, my back muscles went into spasm. I didn't think I could make it through. So I was going to leave. On like the 6th day, just had this insight that so much of the pain that was being created wasn't from like the heat or the throbbing pain in my back or the lack of sleep. It was my mind thinking, there's no way you're going to be able to get through this. You got to get out of here. This is stupid. No one knows what they're talking about. You're 22 years old. Why are you here? Go somewhere better, like Thich Nhat Hanh's place in Plum Village. And just all of these things that were making the moment the enemy. When I saw that rumination and actually said, like, all right, let me just meet the moment as it is. There's pain here. Can I just be with the pain? There's heat. Can I just be with the heat? It was radical how I could actually turn up or down the amount that I was suffering. You know, the cliche of pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. I was seeing that distinction. And that's really where the power in the meditation practice started for me and helped me continue for the 6 months. And then things really shifted in a positive way.
So if you take that as a microcosm, and maybe this last piece of commentary before Brian, we'll move into some of the resistance points for people meditating, a microcosm of your 6-month experience for someone who's now sitting down to meditate for their first time, you can potentially expect to have that resistance, to feel that rumination, to the mind's thoughts then perpetuating these emotional and physical sensations in your body. Because what you were saying was the pain from tight hips was physical and real, but then this is stupid and no one knows what they're talking about. Like that constant rumination was what then amplified the pain. And I know you talk quite a bit about like primary pain and secondary pain. The primary pain maybe being the tight hips, the secondary pain being the story you layer in on top of that, all that other narrative that can then outweigh the physical pain the primary pain that you were first experiencing. Yeah. And so for people who are sitting down for their first times and it's uncomfortable, recognize that could be a part of the process. And for you, Cory, it took like a week or two before you were able to really surrender. And then I know from our deeper conversations that those next 5.5 months that followed certainly brought some more pain in different contexts, but some of the most amazing, beautiful, insightful moments of your life. And you came back an entirely different man.
Yeah. Just a quick point on that. Like one of the quickest hacks that someone can use to work with this is just the mind state of curiosity. I'm deeply fascinated by curiosity because to me, I see it as the opposite of fear. Fear pulls us away from an experience. Curiosity pulls us toward an experience. Fear makes us skeptical. Curiosity makes us interested. Fear presupposes danger. Curiosity presupposes safety. So when you're working with something uncomfortable in your meditation practice, but even in your life, let's just say there's anxiety, the tendency is going to be like to try and push away from the anxiety to get rid of the anxiety. Mm-hmm. Once you become curious about the anxiety, now the anxiety is no longer an enemy. It's just curiosity doesn't make anything an enemy because its only job is to understand what is here. And that understanding, since the suffering and the pain is often being created by pushing against the experience, you could feel the tension that would come from pushing against the experience. Curiosity meets it with open hands. It's like, oh, yeah, what is anxiety like? Oh, yeah, I feel some beating in my chest, or I feel some tightness in my hands, or my face feels flushed. What's that like? What's this like? What's that like? It just immediately takes us out of this place of resistance to embrace. And the more we can do that with difficult experiences, the more empowered we become. There's a paradox to invincibility. We often think of invincibility as this like stoic, no pain, no gain, grit our teeth through it. But the only way we can like become deeply invincible, and the way I define invincibility is like believing that we can be with and get through experiences, difficult ones, is by actually being with and getting through these experiences. So every time you practice that and become curious about something you would typically resist, it's a psychological vaccination of sorts, and you're training yourself to be with discomfort on smaller levels that helps you be with the bigger discomforts of life.
A psychological vaccination.
Yeah.
I think that goes in the show notes, Dom.
Writing it up right now.
Wow. What was really powerful for me there is that these thoughts that come through, these yearnings, these desires, like whether it's pain or something else, it's like we can notice them and not listen to them.
Yeah. That
seems really powerful because I feel like, especially in my life, at certain points, I would have some sort of stimulus and then boom, I have to go and do it. I don't even have a moment to think about it. And it sounds like through that experience at the monastery, you had the ability to create time to be aware of what that actually was before taking an action or not taking an action.
Right. That's real power. It's that space between stimulus and response. I'm sure you guys have referenced on the show, but if not, between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And then in our response lies our growth and our freedom. There's a quote that's often attributed to Viktor Frankl, but it's actually Rollo Moy. In case any nerds are out there.
We're going to do a fact check on that.
You can hardly even find it on Google. It only came from me writing a book and having to find these actual sources. And Viktor Frankl actually never said it. Said stuff along those lines.
Boy.
I'm sorry to blow your mind and your world.
I have to go back and revise so many things I've said and written.
I know, me too.
Now Victor's only my second favorite human.
Yeah.
Cory, when Dominic and I talk to some people that are just starting this, let's say mindfulness or what we call the inner work journey, we get a lot of objections, especially when it comes to meditation. And I'm sure you've heard some of these similar objections, and I want to get your take on them. The first one we get, and probably the most often, is I don't have time for this. And we heard this when we talked about morning routines, whether it was breath work or meditation or anything else that somebody wanted to include in their lives, adding something to their lives they just don't have time for. What's your take on that?
Well, the first thing is usually when someone says they don't have time, it just means it's not a priority. Yet, when something becomes a priority, you find time for it. You find time for work. Why do you find time for work? Because it's going to make money. You need money, support your family, eat, etc. So the currency there is all the things that money brings. The currency of meditation, like, what is it? And for some people, it might be feeling less stressed. And maybe when they sit down for a few minutes and they do it the first few times, they don't notice anything radical. So the currency isn't strong enough to make it a priority in their schedule. However, if they started to see that, oh, wow, the more I do this, the more intimate my relationships are, the better parent I become, the more my kids are drawn to me, the more people like being around me because I don't feel like an anxious mess, the more I like being around myself, the more productive I become, the more focused I become, the better my sleep becomes. Then once all of that is there, it's like, oh, how could I not make time for this? So the time thing is more a priority thing. What I would say is it might not be a priority to start. Just begin with 1 minute, because you can't argue yourself out of 1 minute. Everyone can find a minute, even if it's an extra minute in the bathroom. And the beauty of 1 minute is, like, if the biggest barrier to entry is the idea that I don't have time to do this, well, then you eliminated that barrier, and it gets your butt on the chair to actually do the meditation practice. But usually, like, 1 minute is just long enough that by the end of it, the mind goes, I could probably do 2 minutes. Let me try doing 2 minutes. You get to the end of 2 minutes, the mind goes, oh, this feels kind of good. Maybe I'll do 3 minutes. Get to the end of 3. It's like, oh, I'm kind of getting some momentum. I'll do 4. You just start arguing yourself into the meditation rather than arguing yourself out of the meditation.
Cory, the 1 minute sounds like a gateway drug to meditation.
Yeah, it's a gateway drug. It's kind of a little trick for the mind, in the same way that, like, the first step to going on to the gym might be like putting on your sneakers or your tennis shoes from whatever part of the country you're from. And then it gets easier to get your keys, and then it gets easier to walk out the door, then it gets easier to get in the car, and then it gets easier to drive to the gym. It's the gateway drug. It's leveraging your autonomy. Now you're no longer feeling like I have to grit my teeth through 10 or 20 minutes. It's like, oh, I'm choosing to be here. And so if you want to go that route, what I suggest is download the app Insight Timer. Insight Timer will allow you to set interval bells. Let's just say you set the timer for an hour, and then every minute you can set an interval bell that will go off. And so if the bells ring for 5 minutes, you know it was 5 minutes. If they ring for 10, you know it was 10. And that's just a simple way to start if you feel like time is the issue. But my other suggestion, which will feel completely contradictory, is to meditate longer than you think you can. A couple years ago, I upped my meditation practice from 30 minutes to about 3 hours. I did that for several months, just to see like what it would be like to prioritize that. That's hard. I don't have kids right now, so there are some things in my life that make that a little bit more feasible. But I'm constantly traveling. I have a ton going on in my life, running a business. And so 3 hours is a huge time commitment. But I said, I'm just going to make that the central priority. It was tough in the beginning, but shortly after that, I noticed like I just felt so much more grounded in myself. I felt so much more present. I was listening better. I noticed people wanted to be around me more. I met my current girlfriend a week after I started doing that. So like some weird manifestation stuff started happening. There were just a lot of positive shifts, and it just reinforced wanting to practice more and more and more. Now, I'm not saying to meditate for 3 hours, because for the average person that would actually be a waste of time, because most of that 3 hours would be spent mind wandering. Quality is always going to be better than quantity. And I'd much rather see 5 minutes of very focused, intentional awareness than 3 hours of like a couple minutes of good awareness and the rest of it mind wandering.
Cory, that's exactly how I did it, starting with the 2 minutes, which felt like an eternity. But then I was like, okay, let me climb the 5 minute mountain.
Yeah.
And then when I did that, I was like, oh, okay. And I did that for a couple of weeks. And then it was like, let me try doubling it to 10. And every time I ratcheted up, I felt uncomfortable. Like, can I do this? And now when I look back on it, because I've done a 10-day silent meditation, which is pales in comparison to 6 months, but like from a guy who was afraid of 2 minutes. to going to a 10 days in silence and loving it, it's because of what you just suggested, which is going a little bit beyond, or maybe even, well beyond what you think is comfortable.
Yes. And then that is often the thing that can help make it a priority, or people go, oh, that's why people are doing this. And then the momentum builds from there.
You mentioned a lot of benefits, especially when you started taking more time to meditate. And I feel like this question often gets asked in the gym. You talk to a trainer, the feeling after workout one isn't going to be body change. You may feel a little physically different, or maybe more exhausted, or maybe you have more energy. But I'm curious, from a meditation standpoint, when should I expect to start seeing some sort of results similar to what you were talking about?
Right. These are always the questions that I'm hesitant to give some concrete answer, because it does seem to shift radically. For instance, I have people I've worked with that after several days of a meditation practice, they feel so much more calm. They feel inspired. They feel more confident. And other people, it takes a month of just doing the practice and they hardly feel anything. But then just something shifted. And I think of this one guy, Pat, took one of my 8-week courses, and he was ex-Wall Street, big time high achiever. And he loves sharing this story. But for the first month, he was just doing this body scan meditation where you just feel into different sensations in the body from the toes to the head. And he's like, why the hell am I doing this? This is dumb. I don't feel anything. Nothing's changing. But he signed up for the course and committed to it anyway because of that. And then, I think probably 3 weeks after it, he woke up from sleep and he was like, oh my God, that was one of the best sleeps I've ever had in my life. I've never slept like that before. Interesting. And then he'd be walking outside and colors just seemed a little brighter. It's whoa, I haven't had this experience since I was experimenting with drugs in high school. and his relationships just started to improve. And he wasn't immediately connecting it with the meditation, because it is hard to connect these things, but it just started growing and blossoming from there. So it depends, but I would say at least give it a month of consistent practice before you make any assessments. And most likely you'll start to see results far before that.
Yeah, love that. So 2 more objections. The other ones are, and we talked about this a little bit earlier on, just doesn't work for me. I'm not someone that can quiet my mind. So I don't think meditation is for me.
I'll break that down into 2 things. So being someone that can't quiet their mind, and then this doesn't work for me, this isn't for me. One, that very well may be the case. Meditation might not be for you. And if we're going to be teaching this work responsibly, I think we have to honor that and respect that. I would say 90% of the people that say that, it actually can be for them. But there is going to be a percentage of the population where actually sitting still might not be the best thing for them at this point in their personal development journey. There could be trauma that's there, and closing the eyes creates a whole lot of panic or discomfort. And so there are important considerations around that. But most people, when they say meditation is not for me, it's because they feel a little bit uncomfortable. Their mind is wandering a lot. They feel like I do better when I run. I feel less stress. This is just you're starting something new, and it's going to take some time before you gain some momentum with it and you gain some comfort with the practice. If the objection is, I don't feel less stressed when I meditate, you can't evaluate the meditation based on what you're feeling in the experience. I've had meditations where I felt like, I was sitting on a cloud and there were fairies massaging my butt. And then I've had meditations where I felt like a ball of twisted wire. My body was tight, but not one was better than the other. One felt better than the other. It's evaluated through the quality of awareness. And you just have to think about it in very practical and a very real life lens, which is that your life is going to have good experiences and bad experiences, pleasant and unpleasant. Your meditation is going to have good and bad, pleasant and unpleasant. And so when you show up, the objective is to meet the experience however it is without trying to make it different than it is. And that's the training for your real life. In the same way people take cold showers to practice being with a little bit of discomfort and all the other benefits that come with it. Here, discomfort arises. You don't have to create it for yourself, but if it's there, this is your opportunity to work with the very thing that's going to show up in your life. And the more that you can feel that boredom or that anxiousness or that frustration of why is my mind thinking again? And just take a breath and notice, all right, it's just a thought, and then come back to the breath. Just a thought, and then come back to the breath. Even if it's 5 minutes of just total frustration with the practice. I promise you that that's going to carry over into your life in other moments where you're sitting in the boardroom and someone's speaking and it's terribly boring and you're like, I just got to get out of here, or you zone out. You're going to have a little more of an ability to catch yourself in that default reactivity and choose a different response. And unless we're working intimately with those conditionings in our meditation practice, I haven't found many other practices that really drop you deeply into the nuances and the subtleties of those reactions in the way that meditation does. Because it's not meditation. It's like you're paying attention to yourself in a very intimate way.
And so what you're talking about is cultivating the sense of awareness that I don't believe can come through the running is my meditation, or the cooking is my meditation, or the working out is my meditation, which is something you referenced, right? The running is my meditation. We get that quite a bit. And Cory, tell me if I'm wrong, but the way that I try to feed that back to some people is to say, I believe what you're experiencing is a quieting of the mind. You're in that state where your monkey mind is quite as active, and that feels really good for you. And yet again, you're in a state of doing, right? So running is doing, and working out is doing, and cooking. These things are beautiful things. But I haven't found people who have curated the type of awareness that you are talking about, that you just talked about, from doing exclusively those activities.
Yeah, those activities tend to be ways to escape your life, which can feel very compelling when your life is difficult. But you're not actually then doing anything to be more in your life in a way that's not creating extra pain. And running can be a form of meditation, but depending on the quality of awareness that we bring to it. And listening to music can be a form of meditation, depending on the quality of awareness that we bring to it. But if we're using the experience to get away from something else, or to block something else, or to feel a lot of intensity in our body so that we can be with the discomfort or the frustration of not being able to feel something in our body, or to be with the music to drown out our thoughts, then this is the opposite of what the mindfulness meditation practice is trying to develop.
I felt clarity come through running before. I often do that if I'm working on a problem. I want to go for a run, and sometimes answers come to me. But that feels very different than when I'm sitting down in a meditation practice. And I've certainly never, Cory, felt fairies massaging my butt before. So after we hit the record button and turn it off, we're going to have to go through that meditation with you.
Yeah, if not the fairies, I can help you out there.
I think we're gonna isolate that sound bite and just play it over and over again at the beginning. Okay.
Cory, I have another question for you. I was raised Christian. In Christianity, the prayer, right, is a big part of what we do. And when I started this meditation practice a couple of years ago, and I told my family about it, there was some hesitation. And this isn't their words, but I have heard this said before. It's like, well, isn't meditation an entryway into mysticism or the occult or something that's not religious? And I wanted to get your take on that, because I have felt, at least in my practice, this has helped me understand more. It's helped me connect more to what I feel is a higher power. I wanted to hear if that's an objection that you've heard before.
I do hear it. When it comes to like a lot of my retreats and workshops, people are self-selecting into it, and they've often already worked through that themselves. So it's not a huge objection. But yeah, this is a big thing. And there's really only one good argument in my mind of like where there can be some conflict. And that's when people hold the belief that if my mind is not constantly active, if it's actually clear or spacious, that leaves room for the devil to come in, which is in some belief systems, in Christian belief systems. Not many, but I've heard that. And so with that, there's not much that I can say, because in this practice, you are working with letting the mind settle, and there may be periods where the mind is a little bit more clear. However, I always go back to this interview that I heard with Mother Teresa, and a reporter asked, when you pray to God, what do you say? And she said, well, I don't say anything. I just listen. And then the reporter said, well, what does God say? And she said, God doesn't say anything. He just listens. And then she said, if you don't understand it, I can't describe it to you. And so I see this practice of mindfulness in very much the same way. We're sitting down and we're listening. We may be focusing on the breath. We may be having some structure where we're bringing the attention back to the breath. But it's this deep connection to something beneath like the neurotic, anxious mind that we're constantly engaged with. Like we're settling into our humanness, our being, in a way that we don't typically do, which there's something divine or spiritual or godlike in that. And people can easily adapt this to me, I think, their faith. Centering prayer is where you make the prayer itself like the object of attention and coming back to that over and over and over again. If God created these bodies and these minds, then when you focus on the breath, you're focusing on something fundamentally holy. And you can see that centering of your attention as just coming back to like the purest expression of our humanness, which is to be alive and to be in this present moment.
Beautiful, man. So Cory, one of the things that I'm really super excited about is I'm now going to be bringing meditation to my family because Papa Q and AIM, who's otherwise known as my mom, I'm bringing them to one of your retreats on Long Island, a 3-day weekend retreat. And that's super exciting. So why don't you tell the listeners where they can find out more about your retreats that are coming up, and then also this book that you've been working on for over a year now, and what that's going to be about and when it's going to be out.
Right. Yeah. Thanks. I'm so excited for you all to be there. All the Cortuccios. Those retreats I typically run on Long Island in upstate New York. People can find those on my website at limindfulness.com, and as well as on my other workshops. We'll be trying to get some on the West Coast as well. The book, I don't know how much I can talk about it right now because we haven't done a cover release yet. I've just finished up a manuscript for a book, tentatively, but most likely titled Stop Missing Your Life, How to Be Deeply Present in an Unpresent World. That's cued to come out in December. And it's really diving into the nuances of what it means to bring presence into your life. And not just presence as in like just be present, but what does it mean to soften the walls of guarding that prevent us from connecting deeply with other people and the world around us? And what does it mean to actually like build the inner resources to experience more of our lives rather than having to shut down if it gets too intense? So really like getting to the heart of bringing our full selves to our lives. I'm very excited about it. I put a ton of time and my life into it over the last year and a half, and then all the training that went to prepare for it. If people want to be in touch and find out more and also get a bunch of free resources like meditations and this mindfulness starter kit, they could just text their email address to this number, 631-333-7369. 631-333-7369. You just text your email address to that and there'll be an automated email that goes to your inbox that'll have all of these details and all these free resources. Whoever's listening, I'd love to meet you and work with you and hear how the journey's going for you.
Yeah, and if you want a little bit more current access to Cory's smooth and silky voice, Simple Habit, right? You are the most downloaded meditation instructor on Simple Habit.
Yeah, that's my main meditation platform.
Yeah, so we got to get that. Skip Headspace. That's for, go straight to Simple Habit, download Cory. Cory, man, this has been amazing. You know, I love you, man.
Yeah.
Our relationship has been fantastic. With the book that you're about to put out, I can't wait to read it because I know how much of your heart and soul and research that you put into it over the actual writings over the past year or so, but just the prep you put in leading up to that. I know there's going to be some deep-rooted wisdom in there that I'm going to learn from.
Thanks, brother. I really appreciate it. This was fun, guys. I do a lot of these podcast interviews, but this one I really enjoyed. You're doing great work. Love what you're putting out in the world and love you both. Inspiring, empowering men. Happy to be friends with you.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Man Amongst Men podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And if you want more access to tools and resources, and you want information on our upcoming live events and retreats, head on over to www.doinnerwork.com.